so much is going to hit us that just the shock of all this stuff occurring one after the other alone will be debilitating to a number of people. I think that maybe it's only the report's only real saving grace for the dire projections, and that is that if you read it and then this stuff happens, at least you won't be as surprised. You won't be like deer caught in headlights, right?
Oh, good point. Yeah, and I'm going to warn everybody. Well, I'll let Clif give out the warning too, but I mean, don't take this as gospel because this can change. This report will really upset you once you read all 41 pages, so don't take it all in at once. Take your time and...
As we say, have plenty of pie and plenty of naps, yeah. Digest it in little chunks. And don't take it as gospel. This is not any way of prophecy. This is probabilities. And even within the report, we note that some of the probabilities are maybe a combination of events where the overall emotional release is as we say it will be, but not from a specific group of events, but for maybe a wider range. But it is quite dire, and it can be emotionally upsetting. And we want to let everybody know this. It's not like a horror movie or a slasher film or something where in the back of your mind that it's all being made up for your quote entertainment. This is not that kind of a report or a read, and shouldn't be treated as recreation at all. It should be taken relatively serious because we could be correct on some of this. That's the scary part, is that we might be right.
Yeah, the one I want to kind of jump into is we've been talking a lot about the swine flu vaccination and people shouldn't take it.
Right.
What's your report have to say about that?
The report is basically agreeing with that proposition. And it's even more dire than that because it has elements in it that our data seems to suggest that sometime in late January or February, moves were made that in essence are declaring or are actually propagating a war against the base population of the planet. And one of the means of implementing this war is the swine flu, both as a flu and as a vaccine, which is going to deliver toxic materials to the systems of the people that take it. And in researching this, because I've got to go and validate our predictions against reality, if I read something in the data and it says like, golden eggs are going to pop up out of the desert and everybody will be rich, it's like, no, I got to go and check that out and see if there's any conceivable way, it could just be a spurious bit of collection, which we get in our data at times, just data mining, if you're familiar with the term, of large amounts of data, you get strange connections that are not really meaningful. They're just artifacts of the algorithms you're using to make those connections. So we like to validate against some level of reality, and I've done a lot of research on the swine flu in the intervening weeks since I put this out and since I was writing the report, and I'm convinced that the elements that we see within the report are quite correct. And basically it distills down to this. Enough people are going to believe that the swine flu and the vaccine are a part of a depopulation program on the part of the powers that be, that they will resist taking this vaccine globally. A large percentage of the population will be unaware, all over the planet, will be unaware of the hidden agendas and the horrid things that are in the vaccines. They will accept the vaccines, and many of them will perish. Those that don't perish immediately will perish slowly of associated problems, everything from neurotoxicity to dissolving intestines, that kind of a deal. For instance, we have some really nasty language in there that suggests that over the course of this fall and into next winter, a lot of people will die from lower bowel problems that basically are bleeding issues. And I get this in the report, and I have no idea really what it could relate to at that point. And then later on, it comes to my attention that this is a side effect of Tamiflu, the quote, drug Tamiflu, that when it reacts badly with people, that's how it reacts badly. And it's like, oh, who knew that? And then I start reading, getting more information, and I find out that, some of the, what they're calling adjunctivants, that is to say augmentation chemicals that they want to put into the vaccine, also cause severe intestinal bleeding, and you could potentially bleed out from some of these issues, some of these chemicals. And so it's like, I really hate to see that reality has placed some level of substance behind our particular projections. I would much rather have found that there was, no possibility that anything we were writing could happen because it is relatively ugly.
I agree. So for everybody listening, what would you recommend they do when the swine flu
I recommend that they do the following. Okay, I'll tell you what I'm going to do, and then I'll tell you what I recommend that people do. Every person's destiny is their own. This is my personal philosophy. I'm a martial artist and kind of a hard case. And everybody's destiny is their own. But I recommend that everybody practice what is known as informed consent. That is, don't believe me. Go out and find it on your own. There's dozens of sources out there on the Internet, and you can educate yourself in a real quick fashion. You can go to YouTube and spend just a couple of hours searching on swine flu and the vaccine and the issues, and you'll run across all kinds of stuff. You can go and look at old coast-to-coast radio shows or these kinds of radio shows and listen to people on MP3 format discuss it all. There's a whole lot of science to suggest that what you're being presented by the powers that be, which is the main press and propaganda arm of the political elite, is not actually the case. So I personally wouldn't take the flu vaccine under any circumstances. The concept of putting mercury and these other poisons in my system for no real good reason really strikes me as absurd. And I've done the research, and I find some rather staggering kinds of numbers. For instance, 1,000 people have died for this flu, more or less 1,100, I think, in the U.S. And if we're to believe the CDC, 36,000 people die of regular flu. So why are they hyping the swine flu? Why are they putting so much effort into this on the press and the propaganda? It just does not pass the smell test. And then I start looking at the actual vaccines, and I say, if the companies that are producing the vaccines are doing a good job, then why won't their own employees take those vaccines? If the companies that are producing the vaccines are doing a good job, why must they be indemnified against any lawsuit by the governments of the planet and by the UN before they bring out these vaccines? If they're doing such a good job, why are they only allowing 6 days for testing of these extra chemicals they're putting in, and so on and so on? And it just keeps coming back to greed. And one could say that, well, it's simply greed that's driving it all. But I'm in the business of detecting patterns. Basically, that's what I do, is I detect patterns in language. And I'm talking millions and millions and millions of words that are brought back by my software that are distilled down into maybe 300,000 or 400,000 words and phrases and collections that I look through in making my predictions. And I'm really good at pattern matching. That was one of the skills that I had as a software engineer, is I could detect patterns in software, what are known as design patterns, quite a bit before other people in projects. And a design pattern allows you, for instance, you know that you're going to encounter the same kind of programming problem at one level of writing the software as well as these other levels, and so you write the solution to it in one level in a generic fashion that can be reapplied elsewhere. And it's just because you can recognize the emerging pattern. And the pattern that I'm recognizing right now spells depopulation effort. It spells multiple attacks upon the populace by the powers that be. If we leave out the issue of why they're doing this, there's a whole lot to suggest that this is indeed the case. And then I do the opposite. I validate myself, and I say, if I extract that theory, the theory that the powers that be are trying to kill off about 2/3 or greater of the planetary populace, does any of the stuff that's happening now make sense? And I ask you, examine all the facts around you, the strange hyping of the swine flu, the continuous ranting against Iran and pro-Israel and all of this other stuff. If you take out the idea of depopulation, none of it makes sense in my opinion. But if you put back the theory that someone's trying to get rid of a huge mass of people through starvation, war, and disease, it all makes sense.
Makes perfect sense once you understand their agenda. What can people buy now and put up so they can survive? One of the reports I was reading saying the first shot might actually be given the live virus, so those of us that refuse the shot will still come down with the virus.
We have to examine a couple of things here, okay? And let's put all of our minds at rest and deal with the fear language right off. There's a whole lot of fear language about the mandatory vaccines that we can come back to the mandatory part of it later. But let's just deal with the disease component. If you examine flu in general, and you look at how the CDC reports their numbers, that you find that they say 36,000 people die in the U.S. of the flu every year. And that is not factually true. What actually occurs is that maybe 1,000 or more people die every year directly as a result of what we can call type A or type B influenza. The rest of those 36,000 actually are dying of pneumonia and other opportunistic diseases in a system that also may host type A or type B influenza. But because of the way the CDC wants it reported, a person who dies of pneumonia and who has the flu in the last days is reported as having died of the flu. So you understand the concept of what they're doing there, because they're masking everything through the numbers to even hype up the regular vaccines. It's never been proven that any of the vaccines have ever in any way eliminated the amount of illness that any individual suffers or have in any way reduced the total population impact. So there's no proof that they're effective, that they've ever worked. So if we just set aside the idea that you were ever going to take them and you think they're really crazy, then what could someone do to prevent themselves from becoming ill? Well, there's a statistical correlation between the amount of vitamin D in your system and the time of the year due to sunlight, because vitamin D is made from cholesterol and exposing your skin to sunlight. There's a correlation between that and the onset of the flu season. That is to say, when the northern hemisphere goes into its cold and dark wintry months where you're not getting much sunlight, people get ill because they're not manufacturing enough vitamin D in their system. There's also a statistical correlation between the amount of vitamin D in your system and the ability to fight off disease. That is to say, vitamin D appears to be proof against any number of diseases, not just merely flu. So it seems wise and a safe precaution to take vitamin D up to certain levels. And I say up to certain levels because the medical community will have you note that FDA and the RDA, which is a recommended daily allowance given to you by the powers that be, say you should have 400 international units. Now, I believe my government lies constantly. I have proof of this. And I see no reason to believe that the FDA or the RDA, being part of government, don't also lie. So if you examine it, you find out that it used to be, in, say, 15 or 20 years back, the average person with a light white skin could go outside for about 4 hours and would get sunlight from the, if you just took off your shirt and you stood out there, you'd get about 40,000 international units of vitamin D created in your system over the next 24 to 48 hours by that 4-hour exposure. Now we've got a couple of other issues we've got to bring in. I'm sorry this gets complicated, but you need to understand this as well. We're not manufacturing vitamin D in our systems the way we used to. The reason is that we've got chemtrails all over, and the sun has changed. The sun produces 3 kinds of what is known as UV light, UV A, B, and C. And it's the B kind, UVB, that actually makes vitamin D. And it is being masked by the output of UVA and UVC from our current sun. That's why we don't have a yellow sun anymore. We have this white sun. I like saying that if Superman showed up today, he wouldn't have any special powers because our sun is white, and it's just not yellow. And it is true that the sun's componentry has changed over these last few years, and we're just not making as much vitamin D as we used to. Now, theoretically, vitamin D can be toxic. Let's be clear about that. It's fat-soluble. It hangs around in your body, and you could build up a huge amount in your blood and cause all kinds of problems. So you cannot take a massive dose thinking that this is going to help you. What one needs to do is to be smart about it and take on the order of 1,000 to 2,000 to up to 5,000 international units a day as a what's known as a prophylactic or as a preventative measure. Beyond that, you can also do those things that would make sense relative to the presence of the disease in your system. That is to say, if you felt yourself getting ill with a flu-like disease, then you could do things like take concentrated garlic, for instance, which kills bacteria and pathogens of all kinds.